Thank you, folks. We're proud to have with us via Zoom the director and the producer of the film. I'll give you a moment also to catch your breath. I'll take a moment also to remind you something that came to mind through all of this, which was that David Ben-Gurion, who established the country, of course, lived out his life on a kibbutz, in a shack, basically. And just to see how much things have changed is kind of shocking. This is a very, very powerful film with a lot to discuss. So we're proud to have here our partners, JStreet, to have Talia Benamy help lead the conversation with the filmmakers who are right here with us. We have Alexis Bloom, the director of the film.
Hello.
And Alex Gibney, the producer. Over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this good? Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining tonight. And Alex and Alexis, thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Talia Benamy. I am the Jewish Communal Engagement Chair for JStreet NYC. And if anybody wants to find out more about JStreet, please find me or several of our folks around here afterward. So by way of quick intros for our guests tonight, Alexis Bloom, who's the director, was born in South Africa. She worked for National Geographic, BBC World, and PBS Frontline in her early career. She is the critically acclaimed director of such films as We Steal Secrets, the story of WikiLeaks, Bright Lights, starring Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, Divide and Conquer, the story of Roger Ailes, and Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg. Alex Gibney, who's our producer, was called by Esquire magazine the most important documentarian of our time. His work has merited an Academy Award, multiple Emmy Awards, a Grammy Award, several Peabody Awards, and more. His films include Taxi to the Dark Side, Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, Mia Maxima Culpa, Silence in the House of God, among others. Gibney is the recipient of the 2024 Lifetime Achievement Award from the News and Documentary Emmys. Thank you both for being here tonight. Our tonight, I guess you're very late tonight. I think you're both in Israel, is that right?
No.
Oh, no. Okay, not at all.
Alexis just came back from London.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being with us from anywhere in the world. All right. So I'm going to ask a few questions that I've got first, and then we're going to turn it to all of you. So if you've got any questions, please keep them in mind for in a couple of minutes. All right. So first question on all of our minds is, how did you get the footage? I'm not sure how much you can share about that specifically, but can you talk a bit about that, however much you can, and just generally the process of creating the film?
Well, you're right. I can't say anything about how I got the footage. I was approached on Signal by a source who said that there was this footage, I might be interested in it, and that it was so important that it might form the basis of a film. I get a lot of these calls, and most of them are crank calls, but this one was not. I began to investigate the footage piece by piece, and then I got the big motherlode dump, and I realized just how important this footage was, how special it was. And I agreed to go forward to try to find a way to make something out of it. The one agreement I made with the source was that the film would not be distributed in Israel, because there was a privacy law in Israel that says that basically if you're photographed as part of an official proceeding, no one can release that footage without the permission of the person who's being interviewed. And Netanyahu nor the others were going to give their permission. So I agreed to that condition. There were no other conditions. And then it was a question of who was going to make the film. I was extremely busy, but I also had extraordinary confidence and faith in Alexis. And I told her what I had been leaked and would she be interested in making a film about it. And luckily for me, she said yes. And now I should say that this footage was leaked to me in early 2023. So this would have been well before October 7th. It was during the judicial crisis. But at the time, I was thinking about it more in terms of a film about corruption and somebody's attempt to eviscerate the rule of law. Since then, events overtook it. But anyway, I was thrilled that Alexis said yes, and he was the one who then went on to make the movie.
Thank you for that. Alexis, is there anything you want to add on that front, or?
I mean, do I want to add? I mean, the material is extraordinary. I would say that it was, we knew from the beginning that we would have to get people to participate in the film as well and do on-camera interviews, because even though it's so powerful, the cases are dense. An international audience is not familiar, with this arc. They're not familiar with the various characters. They've all got Hebrew names that people are not familiar with. So we knew that we would have to get somebody to contextualize and to help us understand the interrogation videos. So I think that's the sort of second part of it. You have this amazing material, and then you've got to help people make sense of it. And Raviv Drucker was amazing like that. I think about him like almost like a detective, yeah. Sort of like a detective who can, put the photographs up on the board with the string that connects it all. And he's obviously spent his career investigating corruption, not just of Netanyahu. In fact, when Olmert was investigated, Olmert labeled Drucker, he said Drucker is, what did he say? Drucker is Netanyahu's court reporter. So I think everybody who comes under sort of scrutiny by Drucker feels the heat, and it hasn't just been Netanyahu.
Sure, that makes sense, and I'm glad you were able to get him involved with this.
Yeah.
So, Alex, you touched on the fact that the film is banned in Israel. It is, however, being passed around privately through WhatsApp groups, etc. Can you tell us a bit about, how that reception? Have you heard much about the reception in Israel? Do you have a sense of how widely it's been seen? Are you glad that Israelis are seeing it under the radar? What's your take on that?
Officially, I'm appalled that Israelis refuse because it's not supposed to be distributed there. Unofficially, I'm delighted that they are. And, we were told initially that nobody in Israel would be interested in this material because some of the content of the material had been previously released. But I do think and I know, based on the enormous amount of coverage that the film has received in Israel, both in the print press and also on TV. And Alexis and I have both done a number of TV interviews there. The response there has been tremendous. And I think the response has been tremendous because the Netanyahus have assiduously tried to choreograph their public image in a very restrictive way. And to see the kind of unguarded look at them. Now, Netanyahu himself, of course, is always an actor. He's always thinking about the camera. But in particular, I'm thinking of Yair and Sarah. And also to see not only their unguarded moments, but also the kind of fundamental contempt that they have for the government and the rule of law was, I think, a jaw dropper for many people in Israel. Because it's one thing to read about this stuff, it's another to see it in person. Of course, I'm a filmmaker, and that is what's important to me is to feel the heat of that material. And I think in Israel, the response we've gotten so far is that it has been revelatory in terms of seeing this stuff, and it has been well passed around, though utterly unofficially.
Yes.
Yeah. I would just add that, at a certain point, I went to Israel 4 times, and on the last trip, I told the crew, how critical the film was going to be. And I offered them all an opportunity not to put their names on it. I said to them, you should all think carefully about whether you want to put your name on this, because it's going to be extremely critical, and you're in Israel and maybe you want to work again. And they all said they were really proud to put their names on it, and they all wanted to do that. So I think that shows you, how robust the dissent is, and how much opposition there is. And I think if there's one thing that the film could do, is just to put daylight between Israel and Netanyahu, and show an international audience that there are a lot of people who disagree with his policies, and that the opposition is so robust.
The other thing I would add to what Alexis said, because she said something very important, is this idea of how robust is the dissent. Well, if I'm an American at this moment in time, I hope that other Americans are listening, because it's time to be prepared for dissent to be robust in this country. And
you just sort of answered my next question, which was about the American audience. So thank you for that. So I want to then ask one last question, and then I'll open it up to the audience here. And that is, so you said you got the footage prior to October 7th. At what point did you make the decision to incorporate, the film itself draws a direct line from the corruption and the court cases to October 7th and its aftermath. At what point, was there ever a question of whether to include that, or did you think maybe you wouldn't talk about October 7th, or how was that, thought process, how did that play out for you?
Well, I'll be very brief, and then Alexis can answer it in detail. I mean, once October 7th happened, there's no imaginable film without reckoning with October 7th. The question was whether or not what we were exploring would continue to be relevant post October 7th. And I think both Alexis and I paused and said, let's just wait and see and think about whether or not the dots connect here. And because obviously something so horrific and so important had happened that it needed to be reckoned with. But I think that ultimately, upon reflection, we saw that what was going on here was a story about levels of corruption, starting with champagne and cigars, and then going through a kind of venality that allowed Israel to be vulnerable because of deals that Netanyahu made to stay in power, and then allowed a kind of, or encouraged a kind of vengeful carnage that we're now seeing in Gaza. So ultimately we decided to go forward, but there was never a question that we would ever leave October 7th out of the conversation.
Thank you for that. And I think the point was entirely well made, so I really appreciated that. All right, we have Isaac over here has a mic with. All right, I'm gonna just.
And before I hand it over, I just want the filmmakers to give the full plugs necessary for this film, and to share with the audience a little bit of where the film is going and where people can see it.
Well, the one thing I would say for New Yorkers is this film is going to start a 1-week theatrical run at the IFC Cinema starting on Wednesday. So please encourage everybody to go see it at the cinema. I think it's terribly important for all sorts of reasons, both because it's an urgent film to see, and I might add, Netanyahu is going to be on the stand for the first time at the end of a 4-year trial. He's going on the stand on Tuesday. So it's a good timing. So please encourage everybody to go see the film at the IFC. But then we have engaged with a new mechanism in the United States. It's being distributed territory by territory overseas, but we've engaged with a new mechanism called Jolt.film, which is an online platform that is dedicated to getting films like this out in a timely fashion, in a way that sometimes the cranky, controversy adverse streamers aren't willing to do. And so we applaud them and are fully engaged by that new platform.
You can basically buy a ticket on jolt.film. You go on, it's no subscription necessary. It's very democratic. You just fill in your name and your email address and sort of buy a virtual ticket.
And we'll be sharing this. Sorry, we'll be sharing this, of course, to all ticket buyers through your email communication. So be sure to check that. On to questions from you. Let's, yeah. Juliet's got one over there. Sorry.
Hi. Sorry, I'm going to squeeze back in. The question. Where was the question? Okay.
Hi, I think it's a great film, and I'm an Israeli, and I live in the United States too. I'm wondering why you left out a few critical points there. First of all, the miserable decision of the Supreme Court to let him stay as prime minister during his trial. 11-0, which is a terrible, terrible decision. The other one is the fact that the Attorney General didn't pursue the submarine case, which is the most explosive case against Netanyahu. He let it go, you know, and that's what I'm wondering. Otherwise, I think it's a great movie.
I'd have to say there's so much about the corruption. It's almost like a film into itself, right? I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm very excited by the submarine story. There's a lot of good Israelis who are following that story closely. There's not enough evidence to litigate it yet. It remains to be seen. But when there is evidence, and should he be indicted, it then becomes something that you can discuss publicly in a kind of rigorous way. At the moment, it's tangential. They did drop it. There doesn't seem to be enough evidence. I know people in Israel who are obsessed with the submarine case, and I can't wait until their films come out. But it's a bit of a rabbit hole. The film is already almost 2 hours long. So we decided to go for the cases that could be, I would say, the most succinctly explained to an international audience, and we had to choose. So that's 1,000 and it's 3,000. You know, there's also case 2,000 that we left out. So there's so much that is left out, and that's the hardest job, I would say, like what to include and what to leave out. So, you know, if you want the Attorney General, you know, not pursuing Netanyahu or the submarines cases, then you have to think, well, what do we lose from this film? Which cases do we lose? And, you know, you just can't include everything.
Thank you. It was a wonderful film, much appreciated. But just a general question, did you happen to find anyone to say any kind word about Netanyahu during your research? And number one, and number two is, did you have some people who absolutely refused to go on camera and were afraid or just didn't want to for some reason or another? Anyone famous? You want to leak out any name?
Funnily enough, your two questions dovetail, because there were indeed people who wouldn't go on camera, but who were very willing to speak to me off camera. You know, the October 7th and the ensuing war did change certain things. There's an attitude in Israel that it's unpatriotic to criticize the government in a time of war, right? I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. So I spoke to 2 former heads of the Shin Bet and 2 former chief of staffs of Netanyahu's off the record, and I met them for an extended period of time and had a very frank conversation with them, none of which could be for attribution. And all of those characters were so critical and so anxious about the direction that the country was headed, that it sort of almost freed me of having to find somebody from the Likud that would sort of stand up for him in a way, because it became, I went into this film thinking he's prime minister of a country that's in an incredibly difficult position. It's as they say, a very tough neighborhood. It's not an easy job. He's balancing a country that is full of internal strife and has a lot of external pressures. And so I didn't actually go into it thinking sort of as critically as I ended up thinking. But in my off-the-record conversations, I was so staggered, unfortunately, by the level of criticism, by the things people said. I mean, one former chief of staff who is fairly right-wing, I have to say, I wouldn't even say he's a centrist, leaned over to me at a certain point and said, "Have you ever seen that show, The House of Cards?" And I was like, yeah, I've seen it. And he said, "That's what it's like. It's like The House of Cards. Loyalty is everything. And there's an atmosphere of fear." A former head of the Shin Bet, wearing a yarmulke, not a left-winger, said that Bibi thought that he was genuinely, the phrase they use is David, king of Israel. So in my off-the-record conversations with people, the things that were said kind of freed me from having to kind of present the other point of view. I'm sure, we know there's BBists. We know there's people that support him. But I don't think that any of them would say that his corruption trial is unimportant in his own calculations. They may say that they don't think the charges amount to much, but they all agree that Netanyahu takes his trial into consideration in his political behavior. So the combination of that and of the fact that in some ways the film, I hate to say, but almost goes easy on him, because people didn't speak to me on camera about the really bad stuff, led me to the position that I don't feel like I need to go and find somebody sort of extremely right-wing to say he's a great guy.
I just want to jump in here just because we have time for one last question. And I have to ask, first of all, this is a very brave film. And I wanted to know if in any moment you felt that there's danger to you. House of Cards, I believe somebody was, I don't want to ruin anything for people who haven't seen it, but some bad things happen. And
that
was what I was thinking of. There was definitely the subway episode. There's definitely personal danger, but also, of course, this is a critical film, and Netanyahu has a lot of supporters and a very strong community. Have you had any pushback? Is there any fear of further pushback?
No, there hasn't been any pushback. I mean, Netanyahu tried to block the film when we showed it in Toronto, but Israeli courts don't have jurisdiction over Canadian courts. And I mean, Alex and I don't want to speak for him, but we're not particularly concerned for our personal welfare. We also don't live in Israel. We do think more of our Israeli colleagues, the people who appeared on camera, the crew and all of that. They're the people who have to live there. So, in comparison.
There has been some blowback for Raviv Drucker.
Yeah.
But Alexis, you might want to tell the story about the station, because I think that's a really interesting and instructive story. Obviously, Beef Drucker, was somewhat concerned, particularly because Ben-Gvir is now in charge of state security. And also his station was recently, I believe, taken over by somebody who's very friendly to Netanyahu, or reasonably friendly to Netanyahu. And one of his shows was canceled. But Alexis, tell a story about what happened at the channel.
I mean, luckily it was announced that it was going to be cancelled, and then there was such a furore within Channel 13 that the newly appointed CEO, who was a Netanyahu loyalist, had to leave because nobody at Channel 13 would address her. So she'd walk down the corridors and nobody would speak to her. In a meeting, nobody would speak to her. They basically, as a form of resistance, decided they were just going to cut off all contact with her. And that happened across Channel 13. So in the end, that kind of very grassroots resistance kept Raviv's show on, and she's been replaced. But at the same time as the Netanyahu's lawyers went to court to block the screening of our film, Bibi asked the police to open an investigation into Raviv. And I think, previously, Raviv's been sued and he's used to it. It's his profession. But, the police, as Alex said, the police are now under the sort of aegis of Ben-Gvir. So it's a very different police than you see in the interrogation tapes. And every time I see these guys in the interrogation tapes, asking questions of Bibi, I think about, what's happened to them. None of them have had a particularly good career, understatement, since then. And now, the police it's a different organization. And I think Raviv is understandably concerned.
That said, all of us who are, in this forum right now might think about a domestic residence as Kush Patel is about to take over the FBI.
You leave us on such a high note. Thank you. I want to thank you both for being here. I want to thank Talia for leading this conversation. Our partners at JStreet. Folks, do spread the word about this film. Please join us for more. We're here really through Wednesday night, and we look forward to seeing you. Have a good night and get home safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.